valuations, both from the SECP as well as from the State Bank and the PTA, which includes the TPSP and the branches banking regulations. So I think we've got a very conducive place for potential investments. Now, people ask me two questions. Why is suddenly Pakistan heating up? All these things that I talked about earlier existed previously as well. So why are we suddenly on the radar while these ingredients existed before as well? So there are three potential answers to this particular question. One is the valuations that investors are seeing in other comparable countries with same size of population potential like Vietnam, Indonesia, and India are a multiple of the valuations that are currently in Pakistan. Although we've seen, compared to ourselves last year, valuation we did not think would exist based on promises, which is how this market operates. It's very subjective. Especially if you're looking at seed and post-seed kind of investment. So people are now finding that being in those countries, if there are people looking to invest at the seed level, they missed the boat because the investment valuation required to acquire a 5 or 10% stake is a multiple of what's available in Pakistan. Pakistan has been underrepresented as far as investments are concerned. So this is one reason. Two, although it's a more localized region, Chinese investors in Pakistan, in India, for whatever reason, political or otherwise, are facing serious issues. And suddenly you are seeing, and we've seen within the Planet N group, a plethora of Chinese entities wishing to come to Pakistan, negotiating with people, especially for nano lending, and things like that. Third thing, the year is about to close. The funds have a particular target to make, to invest, especially if they're closed-end funds, and the funds are actively looking for, investments globally. On the local side, there's certainly been a couple of individual entities which have led the way in assisting and creating this hype for Pakistan. I'll personally mention Atif Awan. I think he single-handedly has done a tremendous job in the kind of valuations he's been able to achieve and the kind of investor roster that he's been able to bring to Pakistan. So more power to him. I think a lot of us will benefit from what the roadmap that he's created. And I think all Pakistanis will be appreciative of the effort that he's done. So I see at least 8 to 9 pitches a week from startup. And when I'm talking about startups, my criteria is very simple. Are you changing the customer journey? That's the first question I ask. Even before that, I would ask, what's the problem statement? What are you trying to resolve? So if we see there's a genuine problem statement, then we're saying, okay, what's your solution? How are you changing the customer journey? Are you making it more convenient? Are you fractionalizing what the amount that the customer needs to invest? Are you providing convenience? Are you providing safety? How are you changing the customer journey? Because that's going to determine the success of your particular company. Second thing is, can you monetize it? So, while we can have huge valuation based on top line, whether it's GMV or revenues, and you're monetizing that, but what is the monetization policy or process, and what is the unit economics? Unit economics is key, and unit economics is simply what's your customer cost of acquisition versus your lifetime revenue. What kind of multiple do you see in that? Is it 2? Is it 3? Is it 4? Because half the time, the people I speak to, honestly, have not worked out the unit economics. So they're going to be showing a top line growth, but every customer that they book is actually a loss on the bottom line. And especially if I ask these from established entities like commercial banks, they really don't have a clue of the unit economics. And, sometimes they're booking customers which are losing money, but overall, it seems like the bank's making money because they have other sources of revenue, such as government treasury bills, and the Pakistan investment bond. So can you monetize, and does your unit economics make sense? Doesn't mean you have to make profit the first year. It just means that does your unit economics make sense that over time, as you grow, you will be having favorable unit economics, and some stage in your career, some stage in your company journey, you'll start to make money. I know there are still companies out there, especially neobanks in the world, which are worth 20 billion, 15 billion, and they don't make money. But my view is at some stage, this bubble will burst. At some stage, investors will ask, why are you not making money, or when you will make money? And the third thing I ask is, in the investment scenario is, can you scale? In a country of 220 million, if you're going to come to me with the proposition which says, we'll get 500,000 customers over the next 3 years, it doesn't excite me, and won't excite most investors. Your ARPU may be quite high for that 500,000, or your average earnings, from each customer, but it's not very exciting in a country of 220 million people. So can you monetize? Can you scale? And your unit economics work? Then I use the analogy that if we're going to invest, and we've invested in over 30 companies and we have 10 more in the pipeline, what thesis do we use? Our thesis is that we bet 70% on the jockey. That means it's the founder. So idea, scale, unit economic comes later. The first thing that we bet on, and we're betting on the individual who's come with the idea. Does he or she, in our view, have the resilience, the appetite, and the risk-taking ability to run this company? Many people have aspirations to become an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is not everybody's cup of tea. Globally, 90% of startups fail. In Pakistan, the failure rate is lower because the total number, because firstly, we're not tracking it. And, even if I look at Planet N's own experience, our success rate is much higher. But, that's a small sliver of the total startups. Not all of them even get funding, and they die before that. So entrepreneurship or creating a startup is not for everybody. On the other hand, our demographic is such that we're going to introduce 1.5 to 2 million people in the job market every year. And in order to absorb these people, you would need a GDP growth rate of 9% plus every year, so they can gainfully employ those people. But we don't have that kind of rate. If we get to, State Bank is saying 4.2%, we'd be lucky this year. So where are these people going to go? Entrepreneurship is possibly one thing that they can go to. And I think in terms of talent, in terms of idea, we don't have that missing. This is a very nascent industry in Pakistan right now. Real startups about 6 years, 5 years ago, that's when we really started in terms of the number of people, who started getting interested in entrepreneurship. Because if you look at the schools, this is not something that's taught, this is not something that's encouraged. And until we had a couple of ESOPs where people made money, especially the Careem, buyout by Uber, then people realize that ESOPs have value, and that if they get shares in a company which is illiquid right now, because other than BlueX, no other startups been listed as such, in the logistic area, on the GEM board, first GEM board introduction, then people say, well, I've got these shares, but these shares are worthless for me because there's no liquidity event. So Careem created that first liquidity event where people got significant money, and then, there were a couple of other liquidity events. People are now starting to see that companies in Pakistan can get serious valuation. Before that, the only true exit in Pakistan of a startup was actually a company that was created by my team and myself called Tamir Bank. We had an exit to Telenor, which was previously owned 49% of Tamir Bank, and then acquired the other 51%. It's public information, so I can disclose it. The valuation was close to $100 million. That was the only made in Pakistan, run by Pakistanis, Pakistan-based company, which has a serious exit. I mean, Rocket owned Daraz. It was a foreign entity, so I don't honestly, from my viewpoint, count that as a Pakistani company in a Pakistan exit. Incidentally, a year from the time that we sold Tamir Bank, Telenor raised money from Ant Financial Services at a valuation of $410 million. So we already have precedent of a company being startup, and I would call it an 11-year-old startup, being valued at $410 million. My sense is next year, this number we are seeing will probably, this year's startup number will probably be about 350 million, maybe 400 million this year. Next year, we should see $1 billion of investments in coming in Pakistan, largely in the seed area, but we will see some big numbers maybe in a couple of series A, and maybe a bigger number in a series B. Remember, there's only been 1 or 2 series B in Pakistan, so it's still very young. Most of the investment remains concentrated at the front end side, which is seed, pre-seed. But what we're seeing in Pakistan now is 3 banks have developed their own private equity, not VC arms, and they're looking at investing locally. Faisal Bank is one of them, HBL is one of them, Bank Al Falah is one of them, other banks are looking. I've also recently been approached by about 4 new family groups, family offices, which previously were not looking at this at all. And I've started looking at that because they've seen the buzz in the market. In any market, unless you have local investors also investing, the foreign investors will come in, but they remain far and few between, because they say, if your local investors are not investing, what's wrong with this market? Local investors were not investing previously because they, basically were investing in real estate, stock exchange, building malls, or guaranteed return on power stations. Because there was no liquidity event and there were far and few exits, they always felt that investment, in a startup is an illiquid proposition. Now, it's still illiquid, but because we have major money coming in from foreign investors, local family offices, and you guys got to realize that we have local family offices sitting with 304 million liquid cash, 100 million liquid cash, in names 200 million, and we have never heard of, because these are not names which establish their brand publicly or tout the kind of war chest they have. But these families are now emerging and starting to look at this market. The fact that BlueX got listed and at a multiple of 40 demonstrates to these people that is product mein, is ecosystem mein jaan hai. So that's a very positive. Within the SECP sandbox, they've also approved crowd equity funding, and it's in the sandbox. And recently, the legislation that required to support this to become law has also been approved by the parliament. So we'll end up with 2 additional sources of fund, or 3 additional sources of funding locally: family offices and bank private VC funds. I don't think we are at the private equity stage. Private equity comes after VCs, which previously didn't exist, and investments are already taking place by these banks arms. Secondly, family offices, which typically go together in a club to do this kind of stuff. Crowdfunding is going to be very interesting, because this is a mechanism, especially for people trying to raise $100,000-$200,000 as opposed to $1 million, $5 million. For that, we'll need a more mature crowdfunding market. But for small startups, people just need 100,000 to get the runway for the first year to develop their MVP. I think is going to be a very important and deep source for funding. We're also seeing that local funds such as Sarmayakar, Fatma Gobi, Zain have raised more capital, and they're going to have more firepower. And when they invest, outside investors like 500 Ventures, Insidor, and other entities which are coming to Pakistan for the first time, find comfort because you have a local VC fund which is investing, or a local family office which is investing, and they find it much easier co-investing rather than the cohort of investors being totally based outside Pakistan. So I find this to be a very exciting space to be in. Planet N started 6 years ago, and the amount of funding we raised both at the Planet N level and at the operating company level was sparse. It was there, but it was something that we had to work very hard on. I recently finished a trip to the Middle East and Cairo, and I found high traction for Pakistan, not just for fintech, but for any kind of tech which is disruptive, which shows potential. So I think $1 billion next year is not going to be a very difficult proposition for us to do. Now I'm going to narrate, this is all general stuff. Let me narrate a short story to you about what startups do and when exits take place. So when I was doing the first sale of Tamir Bank's 49% to Telenor, We were in a negotiation. I went to Islamabad. I came across, there were 15 people sitting on the other side. I was sitting on this side by myself because we couldn't afford an investment banker. And we had actually, maybe 3 months of salary money left to pay in the bank, because at that time we were going through a rough period, but we had also established a very good branchless banking process, and the state bank had come up with the branchless banking regulations. So I was sitting there negotiating. They weren't aware of our liquidity position, or maybe they had a hint. We were aware that the state bank had given the branchless banking license to banks and not telcos, and telcos, if they wanted to get in this space, would have no choice but to deal with the bank. So what happened was that they quoted a figure, which I thought was low, but in the end of the day, I probably would have to take it. But it was a matter of confidence, a matter of bluff, a matter of good luck. I wrote a number on a piece of paper and I handed it to them. I said, this is the number I'm willing to deal at. If you want to do the deal, that's fine. If you don't, I'm happy to walk away. You probably need to consult yourself. I'm going out to have a cigarette, and then, give me a call. तो मैं बाहर गया, पहली सिगरेट लाइट अप की, खत्म हो गई, कोई नहीं बाहर आया. दूसरी सिगरेट मैंने जलाई, कोई नहीं आया. So मुझे थोड़ा हाथ हिलने लग गया, because I only had 3 months of cash left in the bank. Before, we would have to figure out another way to do a fire sale. Finally, when I lit up the third cigarette, which I'm not advocating that you smoke, but when I lit up the third cigarette, then somebody came from inside. I went back in. They accepted, what my proposition was, and the deal got done. We subsequently sold, as I said, the balance of the 49%. At with time, some people in the M&A team were claiming that, we had got a great deal. So I always remind them now that a year from that company that they sold their share to and financial services was at 410 million versus what they had bought from us from 100 million. But I have no regrets. I think we had a great deal. It was the first real exit. It showed people that liquidity events can take place. It showed that a locally homegrown company can create a value of $410 million as valued by Ant Financial Services, who know, what valuation is all about. So it's very encouraging. I think the sky is the limit. I think we will probably see, one true Pakistani unicorn, maybe as early as next year. Won't be the first unicorn in my view. Zameen is a unicorn, which is a Pakistani-based company with some holdings outside Pakistan, run by Pakistanis. And I think we will see another unicorn next year, and then hopefully a lot more. But it's not about just unicorns. It's about how many companies can we get which are going to be, be running 5 to 10 million or 15 million valuations. How much customer journey are we going to change? Because the moment you change, I'll keep coming back to that. This is my first question. And if you are an investor or if you are a startup, be prepared for this question. How are you changing the customer journey? How are you making it more convenient for the customer to actually use your app or your web app, or your platform? So we're seeing a lot of good investments happening in right now in dark stores, the last mile delivery, in health tech, ed tech, even agri tech, infotainment. I think metaverse and NFTs are something that we'll see some action in Pakistan as well. So the spectrum is very wide. It doesn't matter which sector you're in. If you can demonstrate you're changing the customer journey, if you can demonstrate that you can monetize it and the unit economic works, and if you can demonstrate that you can scale it, then I think you'll find investor interest. So, ladies and gentlemen, I said I would talk for 20 minutes, which I have. I wanted to have, if there were any questions, but I don't think this particular session allows for that. So thank you once again for listening to me. It's been a pleasure, and I hope to come across some of you, as and when you need to talk about, pitch your company, or just talk about the investment environment in Pakistan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nadeem sir, for your valuable time. It was a very insightful session. Allah Hafiz.